Okay, so I got two different cameras, and I'm gonna record at two different frame rates, and I'm gonna attempt for the 12th time to try the Snyder slow cut, and I'll show you how to do it at the end, so here we go. So I won't pretend that I nailed the shot or this is exactly how Zack Snyder, the director of 300 among other films, achieved this crazy horse shot, is they had 3 cameras on a specially designed rig capturing 300 frames per second, but I'll get into that and I'll show you my 3 camera version after. But this is how you can do the 2 frame rate version at home. So you first need at minimum 2 cameras or phones even, and 2 cameras that have high frame rate options such as 120 or 240 frames per second, which allows you to slow the footage down 20 or 10%. I'm presuming you know that in the US I typically shoot at or close to 24 frames per second, so if you divide 240 by 24, the footage will be at 10% normal speed, so super slow. Now, it also helps to have 2 cameras, as I do, that are either the same or share the same sensor, so it's easy to cut back and forth, but this isn't necessary. But my A cam is my FX3 and my B cam is my Sony ZV-E1. And as you may have heard, because it's old news, but the ZV-E1 has been fully unlocked, unleashed, and updated as we got 4K 120 frames per second with autofocus and 240 frames per second in full HD. But before I go on, it's worth examining how does it look between the 4K slow-mo and the 1080p super slow-mo. And you may also be wondering, how does this affect the overheating and why didn't this camera launch with this feature? Well, simply I can say is it looks amazing, and the answer to the second question likely answers the third. Let me explain. First, if you own the ZV-E1 and haven't unlocked this feature yet, do it. It's really easy, and I'll link Sony's website in the description that will give you the step-by-step on how to do it. And I say unlock and not update because it's a licensing agreement, really not a firmware update, which is strange. Now, regardless, I've been playing with both frame rates as soon as I got it, and at a lake in North Carolina and then at a beach in Santa Monica. And honestly, it's hard to tell the difference between 4K and full HD 1080p. But one thing that I forgot when using S&Q mode, slow and quick mode, which is the only way that you can access 240 frames per second, well, is first you need a V90 card and then you need a full frame lens. This may be obvious to some, but I've been using APS-C lenses on the ZV-E1 because of the dynamic stabilization's crop. But you do not get that in S&Q mode, but you do get autofocus and you get this crazy vintage effect, which is worth sharing. It looks like an old 8mm film footage. So the difference between using S&Q mode on the ZV-E1 and just shooting high frame rates is twofold. On the FX3, I shot 120 frames per second, not in S&Q mode, so I could get the audio. But when you review your footage, it will play back in regular speed, so you'll have to slow it down in post. Whereas on the ZV-E1, to shoot in 1080, 240 frames per second, you have to use S&Q mode. It's the only way to get that feature, so you don't get audio, but you get the file to preview in slow-mo, but again, no audio. But to get the Snyder cut, I wanted some audio to lay underneath. Now, the biggest difference to what Snyder did and I attempted is he used 3 huge cameras rigged up all together, shooting at 100 frames per second for each camera, for a total, coincidentally, of 300 frames per second, and was also using speed ramps to cut between them, which is probably easier than trying to match 2 different speeds. But the key ingredient here is using multiple focal lengths. So in my first example, I used an 85 on the ZV-E1 and a 24 on the FX3, whereas on 300 and on my next attempt, they used 3 different focal lengths. They used a 21mm, a 50, and a 100, mounted as close as they could to simultaneously film the action, and all in the same frame rate, so I tried that. get that shot, I had to use 3 different cameras. So I've got my Sony A7C with the 85 f1.4, but because I'm filming in 1080 at 120 frames per second, that's cropped in closer to 120 millimeters. Now my FX3, I've got 50 millimeters on that. And then my Sony ZV-E1, I'm at 20 f1.8. Now, I completely recommend not doing this yourself. It's really hard to frame it up and sort of put the sensors close enough together that you can match these shots. It's best to have somebody else to do them, but this was just an idea of what you could get with a 3-camera crazy horse type shot. Okay, again, in no way did I nail this, nor is tripping or diving into a pool as exciting as a bunch of 6-pack Spartans slicing up dudes, but I can imagine how this could be applied with even more practical uses, like for wedding videography or real estate or shooting sports cars, or with your short films. So let me know if you have any other ideas with how you would use this, or if you've already used something like this. Share a video link in the comments below. So I won't go into a massive detail to how I edited this, as this would be a lengthy video, yet it's a lot easier when they're all shot in the same frame rate. So you just stack your clips to cut or zoom morph in between, while the variable frame rates you have to stack and carefully cut to try to match the cuts. But in 300, they used more speed ramps than I did, which is as it sounds, ramping up or down the speed of the footage, and then morph zooming, which is cutting between the different focal lengths with some VFX to blend the two. Where on Premiere, I was using keyframes to scale in or out, and the directional blur to hide the morph, along with some zoom transition presets from Envato. Honestly, this technique is better for when you're not filming yourself, as it's hard setting up the shot, trying to match exposure, and I use manual focus for some takes, but not for others. But the best part of the ZV-E1 is that you don't lose autofocus features when you're shooting in a high frame rate, so you can rack focus while you're shooting or just track your eye. But then maybe the worst part is you're more likely to overheat. So I did not do any official overheating tests, but I did shoot a bunch of intervals of 4K 120 in almost 100 degrees of direct southern sun, and after 40 minutes of non-continuous shooting, the camera did turn off. Now, at the beach with a similar setup and 95 degrees, but with an ocean breeze, it did not overheat. Again, this was with practical application. I used the camera exactly how I wanted to. I didn't baby it, nor did I push it by filming for longer than I needed to get the shot. And it was stupid hot out both times. So I am pleased with the results, but some may not be, and hence why this camera likely didn't roll out with this feature. But obviously the goal rig would be to do something similar to what Snyder did and have 3 FX3s because of their cooling fan close together while shooting something with a bit more grace and punch in it. So thank you all for your time and attention. I have a bunch more videos about videos like this on the way, so consider following along and subscribing. All right, thanks guys. Bye.